I'm very happy to introduce Linnea Alexander, a friend, colleague, and mentor, a student in only the most ironic sense, a wonderful human being, and that rarest of writers, one who has an important story to tell and the gifts essential to bringing it to life on the page. Linnea's book, River of Mercy, is a work of creative nonfiction, a genre that challenges writers in ways that might cause poets and fiction writers to tremble. Among other things, we're expected to create a coherent work of art from the inescapable messiness of our lives, while at the same time sticking closely to the fact, to what actually happened. In meeting this challenge, Linnea's book gives us two complementary but disparate narratives, moving in more or less the same direction, but from very different perspectives, each intensely focused within its specific time and place. The first explores her experience as a young woman set loose upon the world, Linnea's departure from her family, initially as a seasonal worker in Yosemite, then as a quasi-student and uncompensated travel writer in Mexico. She didn't actually get around to the actual travel writing until a few years ago. And then, among other identities, a cocktail waitress denizen of the New Orleans underworld, a quasi-documented worker in a Canadian sweatshop, and an explorer of exotic Caribbean islands from a luxurious cruise ship. Of course, as an underpaid waitress, a server to the above decks elite. The second narrative, alternating chapters with the first, begins many years before her stint in Yosemite and describes her growing up, coping in the aftermath of her father's death when she's 7, placed in the sole care of her mother, a woman who herself is defined by conflicts and contradictions that complicate and compromise her life and lead to absences and incapacity, which place Linnea's younger sister Connie in the sole care of Linnea. These chapters describe a precarious life in the making, its center and only certainty, the bond between these sisters, who somehow create a family from the fragments of foster care, an institutionalized mother, and unexpected and unlikely, but life-altering kindnesses from strangers. In the hands of a less gifted writer, this juxtaposition would merely satisfy a reader's curiosity and conventional expectations, giving us a backstory, perhaps providing reasons in Linnea's uncertain upbringing for the otherwise illogical, inexplicable, and sometimes terrifying choices she makes as an adult. I know I'm speaking for most of her readers when I find myself screaming at a particular passage, "Don't do that," or "Don't get in that car," "Don't lend him any more money," "Don't move across the country or cross into another country on a vaporous rumor about jobs or the dependability of clearly undependable friends." And once again, don't get in that car either. Linnea's writing gives us something much more complicated than a backstory or a neat cause-effect relationship between childhood experiences and adult misadventures. Instead, her book explores these colliding reasons and consequences, the basic contradictions that define our lives, in a way that does not reconcile them or otherwise provide the kind of answer or meaning or even happy ending that the truth of human experience denies. True, it does help relieve our anxiety to remind ourselves that Linnea is writing nonfiction, a genre that by definition requires that the first-person narrator live to tell the tale, even when the tales themselves leave survival in serious doubt. We're comforted to know that the character named Linnea we've worried about for so many pages, the person you'll hear reading her work in a minute or two, has survived, and that she inhabits her most recent identity as Professor Emeritus of English and creative writing student, hoping to complete her MFA. Spoiler alert, as of right now, it's a happy ending. Her book, of course, promises none of this. The final pages leaving us wondering whether she's used up all her luck, encountered the very last kind stranger, or even reasonably dependable friend or lover. Or perhaps her book promises this and every other possibility. The last paragraphs return her at long last to the place from which she fled, the bleak uncertainty of Fresno, California. The world all before her and Providence her guide, like Milton's Adam and Eve, but of course without Adam, having left him behind in Montreal, or perhaps New York City, or New Orleans, or was it Guadalajara? Here's how Linnea unwinds these complexities on the page, in prose that flows cinematically and also brutally honest, both in terms of the daunting facts of her childhood. Actually, in describing her childhood reading, she tells us that she found solace in pondering the tribulations of David Copperfield. My immediate response was to imagine David Copperfield finding solace in the tribulations of Linnea Alexander, who clearly had it much worse than he did. Anyway, and also, I'm brutally honest in plumbing the depths of her often impulsive decisions. In the first chapter, her motivations were explored in the literal depths of the Merced River, when, after being asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" by a couple of guys, fellow Yosemite workers, she joins in riding inner tubes over some of the Merced's most treacherous rapids. As we wonder, what were you thinking? She tells us, "I closed my eyes, unwilling to think, and then I gave myself to the river." It's not the first time, nor the last, that the universe saves Linnea from herself. Here, the Merced, named by Spanish explorers the River of Mercy, coughs her up on shore, inner tubeless, and modestly pulling up her bedraggled swimsuit top. There seems to be a kind of give and take in this story between certain death and unexpected wisdom, a result perhaps of survival skills developed throughout those difficult childhood years, but also an ability to trust, to let go, to depend on forms of mercy and grace, offered in this episode by nature, in other times and places in the unlikely and unexpected form of human kindness. Linnea's book inhabits a world that both threatens and loves, a world in which risk is the most certain path to knowledge, even if there's never an answer to all those questions, including what does it mean to be an American in the unsettled 1960s, or how does a person balance freedom and responsibility, or, and of course, our recurring question, why did you get in that car? In Linnea's book, there's much hard-won wisdom and the recognition that the meaning of life can only be discovered by living life fully, and then finally writing about it. Please welcome Linnea Alexander reading from her book, River of Mercy.
Thank you, John, for that generous introduction, and many thanks for your support and insightful suggestions over the semesters I've been in the program. A big thanks to the rest of my committee, Stephen Church, who's also a mentor, John Hales, and Tanya Nichols. And thanks to my fellow students for your support and wonderful feedback. I wish I could name you all, but you know who you are. And thanks to Jefferson, who was always there to answer my questions or offer guidance. And thank you to the whole MFA program. This has been a wonderful experience. The section I'm reading from takes place in Acapulco toward the end of my 6-month sojourn in Mexico with my friend Madeline, who, like me, is 21. My boyfriend has followed me there from Mexico City against my wishes. I think most of the details and the names will be clear in context, with a couple of exceptions. Carlos is Madeline's cousin, who's about 10 years older than us and is settled in Mexico City. And in those days, most people called Mexico City the DF. Ash Wednesday. What's going on with you and Bernardo? I'm not sure, I replied. Madeline smiled and gave me a gentle push toward the beach. You'll figure it out. Let's go down to that place with the music and the good margaritas, she said. I hardly recognized him when I saw him a couple days later. He hadn't shaved. His clothes were rumpled. He looked like he'd been sleeping on the beach. You can't live like this, Bernardo. What are you doing to yourself? I've got a couple things going, he said. Don't worry. I'm making money hustling pool. You're kidding. I don't believe it. Are you selling grass? He stuck to his story, but said he'd do better if he had more of a stake. Can I borrow 200 pesos from you? I'll pay you back tomorrow. Are you crazy? I barely have enough money to get the bus home. Plus, I owe Francisco for the rent and some meals. The next time I saw him, he looked more like the guy I'd met in Tasco. Shaved, clean clothes, confident. You're looking good, I said. Then surprised us both by giving him a hug. I've been worried about you. He shrugged when I asked him how he was doing. I took a deep breath. I know I'm crazy, but I'm tired of waking up in the middle of the night wondering what you're mixed up in. I exhaled slowly. When can you pay me back if I lend you the money? We stood in front of a barber shop, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see our reflections. I watched us stare at each other as if I were watching a movie. His face registered a mixture of relief and surprise. Come on, I said as we walked to the bank. I signed my last two $20 traveler's checks and handed him the pesos. I can't leave you like this, but I need that money to get home. Madeline wanted to go Friday, but I talked her into a couple more days. I'll meet you in the Zocalo tomorrow at 10. I swear, he promised. The next day I checked my watch every 5 minutes. Endless scenarios ran through my head, none of them good. Madeline knew something was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. I'd been an idiot to give him money. He appeared Saturday without the money. No te preocupes, Karina. I just need one more day. It's all coming together. I turned away without speaking. That afternoon, Madeline told me she had to leave. She took my shoulders and looked at me intently. The worry in her eyes contradicted the sternness of her tone. We have to get home before our visas expire. I know, but I can't go yet, I said without explaining. Is it Bernardo? You don't want to leave him? Sort of, I said evasively. We looked at each other for long seconds, held back by what? Maybe respect for each other's independence, more likely our mutual avoidance of a deeper intimacy. When she got on the bus Sunday morning, I bit my lip, trying not to cry. Before she left, she said she'd wait until Tuesday. Call Carlos if you need a day or two after that. I took a long walk on the beach, smoking my last cigarette, going over my options. By the time I got back, Bernardo was sitting on the stairs outside our place. What are you doing here? I demanded. Where's my money? I pushed him away when he put his hand on my shoulder. You knew Madeline left, didn't you? I should have borrowed the money from her and cut my losses. What a dummy, I thought with rising panic. I could have been on that bus to the DF. I'm sorry, he said, almost in tears. I know how bad this looks, but I'll get the money. Please, trust me. Don't even talk about trust. I suppose you want to move in, I groaned, but I unlocked the door and gave him the key Madeline had left. The next day he left early, and I noticed my watch was missing. I sank down on my cot, almost too weary to care. Then with a sick feeling, I thought about my purse. Knowing before I checked, he'd taken the little money I had left. I had breakfast at Francisco's Cafe and forced myself to make a plan. I'd call Carlos and ask him to send me a money order and tell Madeline to wait. I'd found a few pesos in a jacket pocket, enough for a phone call and a pack of American cigarettes. I walked along the beach to the cove where the hippies camped on the cliff above. Their music floated down loud and melancholy. Born to Lose by Ray Charles. On my way back through town, I ran into Bernardo. I pulled away from him when he tried to put his arm around me. You're a liar and a thief, I said with barely controlled fury. We had a fierce argument when I told him my plan, but he knew I didn't want to call Carlos. One more day, he begged, and I'll put a ticket in your hands. My dad will meet you at the Cadillac and pay for your room. He left soon after dawn and told me to meet him at the park that night at 7. I wandered around town too preoccupied to make sense of the increasing crowds and festive revelers congregating in the center. Walking toward our meeting point, some boys came up to me aggressively and cracked a papier-mâché egg on my head. I jumped as confetti rained over me. Bernardo came up just as I brushed it off. "What's going on?" I asked in alarm. "It's El Carnaval. I'd forgotten about it. The night before Lent, like Mardi Gras. You'll be celebrating now, too," he added, as he handed me a ticket to the DF. "Let's get out of here. You have to leave early tomorrow." "What about you?" "Soon." He tried to sound cheerful. "You'll pay Francisco after I leave, right?" He smiled. "Como no? Do you think I'd let him down?" The ride to the city took all day. I didn't know if the few pesos I had would get me to the hotel, or if I could find the right bus stop. It would be almost dark when we got there, and the area around the station scared me. People got on and off at the brief stops in small villages or crossroads. A couple stops were longer, meant for the DF passengers to eat or use the restroom. I stayed on the bus, trying to look inconspicuous, an impossibility since I was the only woman traveling alone. After the second stop, I saw the driver looking at me in his mirror. Sometime around noon, he announced a 45-minute stop, recommended the food in the cafe, and added that all passengers had to get off the bus. I went to the bathroom and found a bench outside the station. The other passengers politely ignored me, but the driver came over and sat down. He introduced himself and casually asked if I were hungry. I shook my head. He smiled and handed me a burrito and a Coke. As I devoured the food, he told me a little bit about himself, his kids, his wife. He had a gentle, reassuring voice, and he spoke with emotion when he talked about his family. When I finished eating, he offered me a cigarette and asked how I was doing. I stumbled over some bullshit version of everything's okay. His warm eyes held no judgment, but I could tell he didn't believe a word. To my surprise and embarrassment, I choked back tears as I told him a short version of the truth. "So, how are you getting to that hotel?" he asked. "The bus?" "No, a taxi. That's not a good area around the station. Te destacada." "See, I know. I'll stick out like a sore thumb. But I'll find someone who'll tell me which bus to take. There's always good people around." I hesitated for a moment. "Like you, Reuben." I didn't want him to think I was presumptuous, but his kindness was like a branch I could cling to in the middle of a raging river. "Sí, es verdad, pero..." He broke off and closed his eyes for a minute, nodding his head almost imperceptibly. Then he checked his watch. "We need to make a quick plan." "Plan?" "It's time to leave, so listen carefully. Take the seat you had until the next stop. Then move to the back. When the passengers get off at the station, get down on the floor. Don't move or speak. There's a checkpoint before the parking area, but all they do is shine a flashlight around the windows. I'll park the bus and check out inside. Then I'll say I forgot something and come and get you." He checked his watch again. "Don't speak to me on the bus. If I get caught, I'll get fired. And be patient," he added quietly as he walked away. "If someone wants to talk, I can't look like I'm in a hurry." I thought about the flimsy beach dress I had on. What about my suitcase? I'll bring it in when I get to the parking area. My heart pounded as we drove through the security check and into a huge lot filled with empty buses. No lights, no people. Reuben put my suitcase in the front and disappeared. Neither of us said a word. I dragged my suitcase to the back, making sure I stayed below window level. I had to get out of my turquoise mini dress into something suitable for the DF. A long time passed and I started to panic. I risked a glance out a window and saw he'd parked some distance from the other buses. Crouching, I went to the front to try the door. It was locked, of course. My mind spiraled into paranoia. Of course, no one would hear me scream in the deserted lot. When I heard the door open, I sank onto the floor, frozen. Reuben said something quietly and walked silently down the aisle. He shone his flashlight on me and chuckled, then reassured me. I almost cried with relief. The bus was near a part of the fence that was loose at the bottom. We scooted under and scrambled into his car. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, still dazed by his kindness. "I have a daughter." He answered with a serious tone that discouraged excessive gratitude. At the same time, there was a hint of warning. "Don't let yourself get in a situation like this again." "I won't," I promised silently. When he pulled up in front of the hotel, he frowned. "This isn't a good neighborhood." "I know, but Bernardo's father will be here soon. I'll be fine." As he got out my suitcase, he paused again. "You don't have any money." "I'll be fine, de veras." I grabbed his hand and thanked him before he left. It seemed a paltry gesture, but he smiled and gently wished me luck. I watched him until his car disappeared, then took a breath and gathered my courage. Waiting for Reuben had put me behind schedule. Maybe Bernardo's dad had come and gone. Maybe Bernardo hadn't called. Maybe his dad didn't want to get mixed up in something he surely disapproved of. The clerk behind the window was the rude man who never left the tiny space where he collected the money. I approached him with as much nonchalance as I could muster and asked for a room. "Pay in advance," he muttered. My eyes filled with tears and I turned away, trying to think. Finally, he said grudgingly, "Your friend checked out today and left you a note." Madeline had left that day. If only I'd gotten out of Acapulco a day earlier. Tears spilled over my cheeks, and the words blurred as I tried to read. "I waited as long as I could, but I have to go home. The bus leaves at 11. If you get this in time, I have enough money for your ticket. I'll be at that cafe in the Zocalo until I leave for the station." Did she say 11 a.m. or 11 p.m.? The cafe was 15 minutes away. I started to reread her note, my hands trembling, when the front door opened. A man walked in, and I knew exactly what Bernardo would look like in 20 years or so. Impulsively, I threw myself into his arms. He shook off his initial astonishment and gave me a reluctant hug in return. Madeline's note burned in my pocket, but I let myself be swept up in his efficiency. He tried to hide his embarrassment as he paid for my room and gave me some money, almost in one gesture. Then he grabbed my suitcase and carried it up the stairs to my room. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said. "Have you gone to Mass yet?" Bernardo's father didn't speak much English, but I understood his Spanish. Mass? Repressing a wave of hysterical laughter, I managed to pick up my end of the bizarre conversation. "I just got here myself, and I haven't had a chance." "Bueno, we'll meet Bernardo's sister in front of the church." We took the bus to Templo de Santiago Apostol, a cathedral I'd walked by many times. The route took us near the Zocalo, and I could hardly breathe, picturing Madeline sitting alone in the cafe. At the church, I followed Bernardo's dad and sister, sprinkling a little holy water on my forehead and executing a credible sign of the cross. Kneeling in the pew, I looked at the people streaming from the altar and finally got it. Ash Wednesday. Last night's carnival seemed weeks in the past. Now, I was pretending to be a good Catholic and would be expected to take communion, something I'd never done. I didn't have long to think about the ethical dilemma. Bernardo's sister had made her disapproval clear with her cool handshake. His dad had been kinder than I expected, but I couldn't tell them I didn't share their faith. I took the wafer in my mouth as the priest put the ash on my forehead. I had no problem repenting the mess I'd made of my life.